Well, I'm Sam Parrett. I am 33 from the UK and I'm a font designer. So I create and sell digital typefaces to other creatives for them to use in their own projects.
Well, I was just looking on your website, and I mean, I've been following on Twitter for quite a while, so I've seen your tweets
Yeah.
as certain jobs come up. But I look through your client list, and there are some incredible kind of places that your fonts have appeared. And I wanted to ask, just to
Yeah.
kick things off, which ones have stood out to you the most? Like, have you stumbled upon or just found your fonts in some surprising, amazing places that you never expected to? Any of those any stories you can share that have stood out like that?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I always feel a bit cheeky listing it as like a client list because I don't technically work with them directly. They're just kind of people who have bought my fonts, and most of them probably don't even know who I am personally. They've just bought the fonts off of certain marketplaces and used it in their work. But don't get me wrong, it's really hard to pick one out as one that stands out because all of them, like when you read some of the names and you're looking at some of like the biggest global brands in the world, and there's just little old me here in my office, just kind of scribbling down some words. It's pretty mind blowing. But there have been a couple which were sort of put up in Times Square, which were just crazy. One was for a Netflix show, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I think it's called,
Wow.
and they kind of displayed that up on Times Square on the billboard, and I think it was PETA or PETA, the animal rights
Yeah, yeah.
organization. They put up like a huge skyscraper-sized like billboard in the middle of Times Square for the New York Fashion Week. So basically, like everyone in New York, just it had obviously my font kind of all over it, like a naked picture of Gillian Anderson, from the X Files.
Okay, yeah.
So it was just so surreal, like because I was sort of a not massive X Files fan, but I watched the X Files growing up, and it was just bizarre. It was like a weird dream, and just imagining these millions and millions of people walking around New York every day, just seeing my font there, just splayed across like a naked Gillian Anderson. It was just absolutely crazy, and there was another one I was going to mention, but there's just so many. I could be here all day just listing them off, and how my mind is blown pretty much every time. Oh, the Britney Spears one. That was projected
Oh,
onto a hotel in New York. The MGM Grand, I think it's called. It's basically where like one of the biggest hotels in. Did I say New York? I meant Las Vegas. In Las
oh, okay,
Vegas.
Vegas. Yeah.
Um, so it was like the biggest projection onto a hotel in the world or something, and she
Wow.
used it for one of her residencies in yeah, in Vegas in that hotel. And it was just, I mean, Britney Spears as well, growing up, who was just like the biggest superstar ever.
Mm.
When I was growing up, it was just yeah, again, mind blowing. I keep saying mind blowing, but it really is mind blowing. Even now, like every time people say to me, "Doesn't it? You must be kind of used to it now." I'm like, no, it just the whole thing is just it's just insane,
Yeah, mind
absolutely
blowing is
insane.
the right
Still think
word
I'm going to
there.
wake up from a dream. Yeah,
Oh, that's incredible. That's really cool. How do you
yeah.
find out about these? Do people send photos to you? Do you just find them yourself? I mean, I'm assuming you're not wandering around Times Square and just happening to see it all the time. How do you discover who uses
No,
your fonts?
yeah, most of the time it will be someone else who kind of points it out to me. Like I'm lucky enough to have like a really cool following of people on Instagram who recognize my work, and they get really excited about it as well, which is just amazing. That always makes me so happy that other people get excited about it when they see my fonts. But yeah, it's usually other people. Sometimes I will know about it because I've sort of spoken to maybe the design agency or whoever's kind of
Mm.
behind it. So sometimes I will know that it's happening before it happens. But yeah, usually it's just kind of spotting it. So I do spot some myself. Obviously looking. I don't wander around Times Square, but obviously you see these things online and on social media. Yeah, so a lot of the time it is a surprise and a really really cool surprise. But saying that, I do obviously I live in Bristol here in the UK, and kind of when I am wandering around the shops and stuff, haven't done it so much this last year,
Mm.
obviously, but when I do wander around, I worry that I must annoy people because I'm always like on the lookout for fonts, and when I spot something, I'm like, oh my god, it's my font, and I'll be like, so I saw one in in Victoria's Secret, I think it was, and
Oh, yeah.
they have a lot of like women's lingerie in there, and places where I people like me don't really belong. So, but then I saw my font in there and I got really excited. And then I sort of go in there and start taking like the photos with my phone, and everyone's just looking at me really weird. So yeah,
Have
I
you
do
ever
get
said
some odd
like, "Oh,
looks when
don't
I
worry,
see that.
that's my font," or like, "I'm the designer" or something, or you just
Yeah,
let
I
people think
think
what they
I've
think?
said that once, or I've said that once or twice, but I think people just don't really understand what that means.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're kind of not in the design world, people just kind of looked at me like I was even more odd at that point, and didn't really do me any favors. So now I just kind of quietly, secretly take photos of things. There's no way to do it and not look strange. But hey ho,
That's incredible. Though. Seeing like
it's all good
the
fun.
the effect you can have from, like you said, your little home studio, and then it reaching the entire world of some of the biggest stars in culture and
Yeah,
entertainment is very inspiring. That's really really cool to hear. Well, let's go back
yeah,
like
it's amazing.
before all before today, before you were working full time in as a font designer. What were you doing beforehand? Were you working at like a traditional job or a standard office job? What was your previous
Yeah,
life?
I was working in retail, yeah. So I went to university, and I studied psychology, which is a bit random.
Wow.
But so I sort of I grew up in a like a small village, and I didn't really want to hang around there. All my friends were going off to university, so I basically just needed an excuse to get out and get into Bristol, really, which is where I am now.
Hmm.
So I just kind of picked a subject which I was, I suppose, like fairly interested in, somewhat good at, but my heart was never really in it. If I'm honest, I kind of knew that throughout the course, but um, graphic design was always sort of just a little side hobby. Never really took it very seriously at that point. But yeah, anyway, so I graduated and just kind of looked for any work I could get. So oh god, the first thing I did was a door-to-door sales job, which was just
Wow.
some horrendous multi-level marketing scheme, which is a self-employed career that I advise everyone to stay away from. Have you heard of those?
I've heard a little
Where
bit, yeah, just through
the
like
pyramid
secondhand.
schemes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was all absolutely awful. But after that, I got a job in a phone shop, which was a little bit better. But I met some cool people, but it was still pretty awful. Selling phones all day. Well, I say selling phones. I mainly just got shouted at by customers whose phones didn't work, but I was supposed to be selling phones. So, yeah, that was the last thing I did before I jumped into self employment.
Okay, so while you were there working at the phone shop, had you started creating some of your own fonts at that point? Was there like an overlap period, or did you? What was that
So
transition like?
yeah, the font thing didn't come for a while. So
Ah,
it was graphic. So I was a freelance graphic designer for a while
ah,
before I started making fonts. But yeah, I played in a band as well at this time. Played guitar, and so I was doing our graphic design for the band. So I was making our logos and like our MySpace page for anyone who's old enough to remember MySpace. Designed all of that stuff, and never really thought it would become a career, but I was really passionate about it, really enjoyed it. I was rubbish at it, absolutely awful, but I loved it. And so I suppose it kind of caught the attention of a few other like friends bands and local bands, and they would then ask me to do their work, and it kind of clicked like, okay, maybe I should start charging a little bit for this. So it was a sort of side hustle, very very small side hustle, as I was working in the resale in the phone shop. I didn't have much time to do it, but I
hmm.
was doing it a little bit. But so probably for a few months, maybe 6 months or so before I left the phone job, um, I probably jumped out of that job a bit too soon. But it got to a point where I was just completely fed up with it. Realized that I was never going to survive in the real world doing a real job, working for someone else. So I just kind of had no other choice than to make the design career
Mm,
work, really. But the thing is, sort of I never my goal wasn't to become self-employed. It was just to make a living off of what I loved doing, which was graphic design. And because I didn't have any qualifications, didn't have any experience, my only option really was to go self-employed. And I'm so glad I did, because I wouldn't have it any other way now. But yeah, I kind of, it was the only choice for me if I wanted to get into graphic design, which I was so desperate to do. So yeah, there was a small overlap. Probably should have left it a bit longer and saved up some money. But yeah, I just made the leap. Told my boss that I was kind of fed up and I was leaving, and I I was a bit cheeky because I should have given him a month's notice, but I didn't. But in my head, I was never going to be applying for any jobs anytime soon, so I didn't really want or need his reference. So yeah,
I like that you actually you make that a feature on your website. I think underneath that list of places your fonts have been seen, you've got what was it? Qualifications, none. Awards, one, none. And it's kind
yeah,
of, it adds to the personality of your site. It's almost, yeah, it's almost like a
yeah.
badge
Well,
of
it's
honor at
just a
this
cheat.
point.
It's sort of a yeah. It's a little bit of a jab, I suppose, at people who I've got nothing against awards and
Mm, mm.
qualifications. I think it's great if you can do that. But it was just kind of it's my personal journey, and I just wanted to show people that you don't need all the awards and all the qualifications to become successful in what you want to do. You just have to put the hours in and have the passion and the hard work. Yeah,
Definitely,
so that's why I
especially in
put
the
that on there.
creative
Yeah,
field. Like these days,
yeah,
you can learn so much through self-learning, and that's actually what I wanted to ask next. How did you go about learning everything you needed to know for graphic design? Were you learning online? Did you do any sort of online course? What was that process to pick up those skills, and how did that, I guess, also the skills
yeah.
for font design, how did that all come about?
Um, I really want to give something insightful here and give you some sort of secret formula, but I really just kind of learned it all on YouTube. Um,
Perfect.
there's just such a wealth of information out there. There's not really any excuse to not start any hobby or learn any hobby by yourself, because the graphic design, when it started out, I just kind of needed to learn a lot of Photoshop techniques, and there's just so
Mm,
many Photoshop tutorials on YouTube. You can pretty much search for the exact thing you want to achieve, and you will find it on YouTube. And the same with font design. People ask me today, like, how do I get into what you do? How do I learn it? And there are some really good Skillshare courses, and I know some people who run Skillshare courses. But when I started, I didn't really have any money to spend on courses or anything like that. So yeah, I just went on YouTube and typed in font design tutorial, and the first one that came up was a tutorial on Font Lab Studio, which is the software that I still
mm.
use to this day. It was a really good in-depth tutorial. It went on for absolutely hours, and I felt very out of my depth. But but yeah, honestly, it's just YouTube. It's as simple as that.
That's fantastic. And you're right, anyone could do that. There's, like you said, there's no excuse for not
Yeah,
learning any sort of hobby and creative pursuit you want to learn with the amount of stuff people put on
yeah,
YouTube. That's great.
yeah.
Okay,
As long
so
as you're
you were
just willing to
working.
learn and put in the hours.
Go on. Yeah.
Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah,
No, I was just
yeah.
saying, as
That's
long
all
as
it
you have
is.
the drive. Yeah, yeah,
So you were working as a freelance graphic designer. You were learning through YouTube. At what point did you, I guess, just discover the idea or come across the idea of moving full time to fonts? How did that capture your attention?
yeah. It kind of happened very quickly. So I was working sort of mainly in the music industry through my band connections, and I designed a lot of logos, and I had like a rejected logo concept for a band, which I was really happy with because I'd hand drawn it all, and I thought it looked really cool. Unfortunately, the band it wasn't quite the direction the band wanted to go in. So I had it was a really long band name as well. So I remember having all these letters kind of already designed, and just thinking I don't really want this just sat on my hard drive doing nothing, because obviously you can't resell a logo design. With all those, unless a band has exactly the same name. So yeah, I just thought maybe I could turn this into a font, seeing as I've got sort of nearly half of the letters of the alphabet here. So it really was just kind of a learning exercise at first. I think I had a couple of texture packs for sale on my website, which for like a couple of pounds, which I sold maybe like 4 or 5 of. It was just like a little side thing I was doing when I had a bit of downtime. So yeah, I thought, well, maybe I could make a font to sell with those texture packs, and so I kind of mentioned to my friend that I was making a font, and he he said, "Oh, are you going to sell it on Creative Market?" And I didn't have
Mm.
any idea what Creative Market was. Um, so I put it up for sale on there, and I suppose the rest is history, really. So my mind was pretty much instantly blown at the idea of being able to sell a digital product and kind of sit back and do nothing and watch the sales come in. It was just completely new concept to me. It was amazing, and the font I think made within the first week like multiple times the amount I would have made for the logo design, for the one-off payment for the logo design, if you know what I mean.
Wow.
So it was just a real eye opener of the potential. I could suddenly open up my work to this global audience, rather than just working in this very like small specific niche of um,
Mm.
or in the music industry, which I was working in. So yeah, it was amazing.
Gee, that would have been such an exciting moment. So you just put it online on
Yeah.
Creative Market. Did you market it yourself? Did you spread it around, or you let the kind of engine of the website kind of feature it for you?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of Creative Market, is that like anyone can join, and you're instantly kind of, your marketing is kind of done for you. I think
Mm.
it was featured in a newsletter on Creative Market, which was then sort of instantly sent out to. I don't think they had quite a million customers then, but it must have been hundreds of thousands of customers, which is just an audience I could never ever reach on my own. So yeah, there was no marketing done on my part. It was all thanks to
Wow.
Creative Market. Yeah.
And then you just thought, well, let's do more of this. This worked. Let's keep going.
Oh yeah, 100%. So that, just to stay on that first one, a couple of months later, that was then picked up by WWE, who still use it for their like titles and merchandise and stuff,
Really?
which was just it was just crazy. Yeah. So I just kind of knew then, okay, I'm onto something cool here. So I did continue with the freelance work for a while because I'd built up some really good relationships with clients, but I just had my daughter at this point, and I really had to kind of think financially.
Mm.
Uh, the freelance stuff for me had kind of hit a ceiling of, um, there's only so many hours I can put into freelance design, and the music industry is as awesome as it was, and I got to work on some really cool projects, some really really creative projects as well. But there's not there's not very big budgets in it, and you know I'm not. It's not all about the money for me, but when my daughter was born, I had to kind of prioritize things that were gonna, you know, feed put food on the table, I suppose, and pay all the bills. So, and the font design, I was kind of looking for something new and different at this point, because I'd been freelancing for 5 or 6 years, and I was kind of doing a lot of the same stuff that I was doing, every day. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I just kind of went, after a couple of months. I just said to everyone, all my clients, I was like, so, this is kind of the end of the road, which was quite difficult to do because a lot of these people were friends now. But it was
Mm.
definitely the right decision. And then I just went full steam on fonts, because it very quickly got to a point where the fonts were making more money than the freelance work was, and I was putting less time into the fonts than I was into the freelance work. So it was kind of a no brainer, really. So when I was able to then go 100% on the fonts, it all just kind of exploded, and yeah, here we are.
Wow. That's such a great story. I love
Yeah.
that. It's really cool seeing all the individual pieces and how they all lead to where you are today. That's really cool. Yeah. What would you say for you personally is the best and worst thing about being self-employed? What do you enjoy the most and the least?
Oh well, there's so much that outweighs. There's so much good that outweighs the bad. That the bad is almost irrelevant for me, because I get to work on. I get to do what I love every day, and I get paid for it, which is just incredible. And it's doing something which actually helps people as well, because other designers will use my work and it will elevate their own work and help them sell products or whatever. So yeah, it's just absolutely amazing. I get to see my young kids grow up, spend so much time with them, and which is just such a privilege. Um, and I can work my I can work my personal life around my working life, which
Mm.
is the other way around if you're not self-employed. Honestly, I could go on for ages about the benefits. Not having a boss, not having to worry about being fired. It's it's just there's no other. I could never ever go back to employment unless I had no other choice.
Are there any challenges? Anything you do think might be less stressful?
Yeah, obviously, there are challenges. I think I'm at a really good point now where there aren't so many. But obviously, the first few years are really tough financially.
Mm,
The first few years were a real struggle. But I had I didn't really think about it too much because I was just loving what I was doing. So
mm.
anyone thinking of going self-employed, I would really recommend going into something that you really are passionate about and that you love doing. Because yeah, those first few years were tough, learning the ropes, having
Yeah.
hardly any money whatsoever. But that's all part of it, really. I suppose the admin side of it, the paperwork can be a bit
Mm.
boring, but the marketing as well. It's not really a downside, but for me personally, it's not something I'm particularly that interested in. I know some people kind of enjoy that side of it, but for me, it's just kind of part of the job and not something that I particularly enjoy, I suppose. But
What advice would you give to someone who could be who's working towards a similar career to you or a creative career based on your experience? What advice could you give to that might help them in their journey?
so what? So for anyone looking to become a font designer,
Could be font designer or just a general
you say?
creative career, freelance graphic designer. I mean, by the sound of things, it sounds like part of your advice would be, make sure you're doing something you love for starters, because it's going to be challenging. So
Yeah.
if you enjoy what you're doing is quite important. And I guess pushing through those first few years.
First few years, I would say, sort of stick to your principles. I was really not a very good graphic designer, but I made up for it in sort of going the extra mile for clients, always
Mm,
being there to help them, and the customer support side of it, which I really enjoyed building up those relationships with people. So yeah, it's really hard to stand out from like a saturated crowd of other freelance designers and sometimes you just feel so overwhelmed by the quality of work that people put out there. So yeah, I would say make up for it in other elements of the service you provide, and people will always appreciate it when you kind of yeah, like I said, go the extra mile for them. So that's kind of how I built up a client base early on. But getting into like font design specifically, I would say don't just one day say I'm going to get into font design and drop everything else, because it's not really something you can just kind of jump into the deep end of. It's because it's such a specific kind of niche within graphic design. I would say if you're really interested in graphic design and possibly looking into font design, then you kind of need to learn the basic elements of design and design theory and typography. So start as a freelance designer and learn the ropes and learn everything you kind of need to know about graphic design before kind of dipping your toes into font design, because it takes a hell of a lot of patience to be a font designer, and it's something that you have to really love doing. And sometimes a font can take months and months to make. So if you jump straight in there and do nothing else and spend months making a font, which then potentially doesn't sell, it can be heartbreaking, and it can yeah. So it's risky. It's a risky industry. So I would definitely start it as a side hustle if it's something you're looking to get into. It's a magnificent beast. It's a magnificent beast, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming when you kind of look at the amount of glyphs. Excuse me. You need to put together.
mm.
I just take it one character at a time. But yeah, it does take a lot of skill and patience.
What does your typical workday look like these days? Do you have a set schedule? Do you keep to a schedule, or do you kind of go a bit more freeform?
My typical working day has evolved a lot as my kind of personal life has changed. I know we spoke a bit
Mm,
about this before the interview. So at the moment, I have my kids here every other week. I've got two young kids, and so when they're staying with me, there is no working day. It's just absolutely crazy. And when they're not here, it's pretty much full steam font design. So I'll get up, as early as I can, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then pretty much just go full steam on the font design until maybe 7 in the evening. But then, so that does sound quite intense. But then, obviously, there is a time when the font is then launched, and I will then slow things down for a couple of weeks, have a bit of downtime, work on some other things, like my own website and doing cool interviews like this. So it's quite a nice balance I've worked out between working on the fonts and then my own sort of family life as well.
What resources would you recommend that helped you in your kind of professional journey that you could recommend to others? Are there any books or podcasts or websites that really stood out, for example, while learning font design or just generally a freelance creative career?
I suppose if there was actually, this is kind of slightly different to what you're looking for, but something that really helped me when I set out was a government grant, a financial grant I
Ah,
received when I left my phone job and I was unemployed. I There was a someone who worked in the so in the UK we had, this is going back 10 years, so I'm not sure if it's still the same now. So I was receiving what's called job seekers allowance, when you're looking for work. And yeah, there was a lady at the job seekers center or whatever it's called. She was really helpful, and she said, if you are looking to set up your own business, we can sort of help you with a grant. For 6 months every week, I sort of received a payment, which wasn't a lot, but it meant I could eat whilst I was setting up my business. And honestly, it was an amazing lifeline. I honestly think without it, I don't know if I would have been able to set up the business, or it would have been a real struggle without it. Even more so than it already was. A lot of people kind of look at government handouts as a bad thing, but that was just proof that it really does help. And now I've got this business set up where I'm paying back to the government with my taxes. So I would say
mm.
to anyone who's looking to set up a business to see what financial help is out there for you. I don't know what it's like now, because, like I said, it was going back over 10 years, but I'm sure the government will want you to set up your own business. So definitely look out there to see what help you can get financially.
All right. So what's next for you? Are there any goals you're working on at the moment that you can give a sneak peek to? Any fonts in the work? Any new projects that you're working on that might be launching soon?
Yeah, so I'm working on my first ever collaboration on a font. So the
Ooh.
first time I've ever sort of, yeah, worked with anyone else on a font. So that's pretty cool. It's a bit of a learning curve, like to kind of figure out the logistics of how we're both going to do it. But it's the font side of it is done now. So it should be launched. I think we're aiming to launch it at the end of the month. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that one. But other than that, just as long as I'm enjoying making fonts and I still have ideas for new fonts, then I'll just continue making fonts, because it's great. I love it, and I will just continue to do it for as long as I can.
All right. So, very last question: where can people follow you and find your work online? Where's the best place to keep up with your work?
Best place is probably Instagram, which is at Set Sail Studios, and you can view all of my fonts on my website, which is setsailstudios.com. I think we're good, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on as well, and it was really nice to connect with you.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's been really cool hearing your story. Really, yeah, really appreciate your time.